This conference will now be recorded.
On your picture.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Mike.
Hello. How you doing?
Jim, I think that Jen Truax is not only going to join us, but take our minutes. And Mark Robbins should be joining as well, MHR.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Hi, Marion.
Hi.
Mike, why so dark over there? Are you in a power failure or something?
No, I'm upstairs in the living room. I don't have any lights on but the Christmas tree. I'm feeling festive.
Okay.
So I think we're just waiting for one more person.
Jim, while we're waiting, would you mind if I give a shout out to Mike Serrano and Mark Robbins, who are both on the call? Mike, thank you for the ed specs, the site plan, and the application you sent over. It got me really up to speed rapidly, so I appreciate that. Mark, thanks for meeting with Marion and I last week before Thanksgiving to kind of get me up to speed on the solar. Big help, so thank you both.
And I think we are ready to get started. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 7:08. And with that, we will start, Mike Serrano, if you don't mind, with a review of the roof project and where we are currently.
Evening, everybody. Mike Serrano with Fryer Architecture. As you know, back in September, we were hired to just help you put together documents to make application for state grant assistance. In the letter of agreement, I basically put together kind of a list of things that the state anticipated that you were going to bring upon filling out the paperwork. I left you a phone number for Mr. Bob Faceto, Robert Faceto at the state, to coordinate all the grants, all the management of the grant paperwork and everything. So today, I have sent over all of the paperwork that's required. About 90% of it's fulfilled. I just finished the cost estimate today and sent that over. So all of that can be input into the grant application. The other things that need to be done is there's 3 resolutions that need to come locally from Ashford. One has to come from the Board of Ed, which is the approval of the ed spec. So I basically wrote an ed spec that could just be pasted to your letterhead, and if you, whatever modifications you feel you need to make, go right ahead and do it. But that is really it's pretty simple, that it fits into your educational program, and so you can just get that certified, because they're going to want to see that it was voted on at the Board of Ed as a final resolution. So that needs to be attached to the application. And then there's a series of local legislative resolutions as well. I sent out a list of those. You can almost make those verbatim at the council, and that's that you've put a building committee together, hired an architect to do the schematic design, and that the money's in place. So you have a copy of those resolutions that just need to go to the board to be approved, and then the proof of local authorization. In addition to that, there was some additional paperwork that needed to be put together. We put together a school safety and security letter that you can just transfer over to the superintendent's letterhead. Flood management certification, basically meaning that you're not in a floodplain. And then there's a site analysis form, SCG 053. I filled about 90% of it out for the board to fill out the rest of it. So you have copies of that. And then there's a bunch of things that get attached to that. There's a FEMA map and ecology map. If there's anything that they need to be aware of locally that needs to be taken care of. And then radon potential map, and then a roof plan, which is really not anything more than it's just an area plan that shows the age of the roof. And in your case, you have like 6 different ages of different sections of roof that were repaired or replaced at certain times. And they want to see that just so that they could determine eligibility of roof sections. As of right now, the entire roof of that building is scheduled to be replaced and is all old enough to get your full reimbursement from the state on. So all of that stuff I've sent forward for you guys to take action on, either at the board or at the Board of Education or at the Selectman's office. And I'm available to come down there and assist if you'd like me to sit there with you while you're filling out the paperwork, or you just want to get me online and talk about it as you're doing it. And I'm available if you guys want me on board for your phone calls with Bob Faceto, or any of the state auditors up there as you're working through the process. It should go really quickly. You're not a priority project, meaning that you can go on, make your submission before June 30th, and then you get on the State Bond Commission the following December. This is a non-priority project, so you can make this application at any time of the year, and it should go through pretty quickly. Following this, once they accept the grant application and give you a state project number, you can move on to the next phase, which was hiring architect, project manager, construction manager, however your delivery, however you want to deliver the project. We're pretty much done with where we are, and I'm available to help you wherever you need.
So you're saying that we cannot get this done this year? It would have to wait until next year? We couldn't get it done for this summer?
Well, so the reason I don't believe you're going to be able to get it done for the summer has really nothing to do with this paperwork. It has to do with lead time on some of the roofing materials right now are delayed. If we were to go to bid tomorrow, we might get the installation in June for the roof. So
In what?
because it's a long lead time just to get the insulation to put on the roof, and we're a long way from actually you having an architect, hopefully me, but having an architect design the roof out. The roof's going to have pitches, it's going to have scuppers, it's going to have drains. It's all going to be pitched. It's going to be laid out according to how the roof design is. All of that stuff needs to be then bid out and then made and then delivered to the site. There's just not time to get the project done for the upcoming summer. I've talked to manufacturers and I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not all bad news. However, I think you're going to end up with a really, really good bidding climate by the time we get this thing ready to bid, because roofers are backlogged for this summer anyway, so you're not going to get a great price just because of the backlog of materials. So if we're bidding out something, say late spring this year for the following summer, I think you're going to get much better pricing.
Okay, and so the documents that you sent, we know which need to go to the Board of Ed and which need to go to the Board of Selectmen? You were saying some needs to go to the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah, it says it right on there who the educational specifications have to be voted on by the Board of Ed. The legislative resolutions are by the selectmen, and the proof of local authorized funding is the selectmen. And this application that's going to the state all gets the person making application is the superintendent of schools. So all of this, when all the resolutions and everything are done, they'll go to the superintendent's office, who will then transmit them to the state.
Okay. So the Board of Ed is not meeting this week, but we'll be meeting Thursday of next week. So I'm sure we can get that approved then. Whatever needs to be approved or filled out or whatever.
Yep, they have all the paperwork. So if there's something I can do to help push this through, just let me know.
Okay. Craig, you'll let him know?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Are there any other questions for Mike at this time?
So Mark, you were talking about the fact that we were going to try to do it this summer. So how does this deal with our solar stuff if we can't do it this summer? Is that a problem?
Well, I think it's really excellent that Mike's on board at this point and has the deep knowledge of all these particulars. And as he mentioned, the nuances of the roof material and the needs for drains, and it's a major project and it's got to meet code. And along with that, while we're all doing this in the spirit of environmental sustainability and energy conservation, we need to look at insulation. Probably need to bring the roof up to code, and it's a chance to do that now. You only do it every 30 or 40 years, I guess. So, and so the better the insulation, the better the building, the more higher performance we're going to get out of the building. So all important to do that thoughtfully. And what he's alluding to, supply chain, so COVID, the issue with the insulation, we've got several projects experiencing this. So there's sort of two major components to roofing, which Mike knows more about than I do, but there's the EPDM rubber, and then there's the insulation below it, which is this polyiso, which is this foam. Think of it like a kickboard when you were in swim class in school and you held that rigid foam kickboard. Well, that's what this insulation is made of. Dimensional pieces, and then so that the roof drains, not all of the insulation is the same, right? Some of it has pitches, and it's like wedges so that you can pitch into drains at the water from the roof. So there, I guess it was in this past winter, there was a fire in a factory in Texas. Something about climate change and snow and a roof caving in a factory in Texas. And this Texas made the one polymer that is the expansion additive for foam. And all of the companies, and I'm probably ruining the story here, Mike, but like whether it's 3M or Carlisle or Firestone, they all needed this additive, this expansive additive, this chemical that creates the rigid foam. And that's been in short supply for many months. So I have projects in New Haven, Wilton, Greenwich that are held up because of this. So that is like the supply chain issue. It's not really COVID particularly. It's this aberration that happened with this one factory. So we are anxious to install the solar system as soon as possible so you can enjoy all the environmental benefits and $40,000 a year of savings and get that started sooner. The problem with the sooner we install it, the better our long-term 20 or 25-year PPA rates will be. What we have is we secured with the state this 15-year credit where the state's gonna, Eversource is going to send you a check and we're going to pledge it to whoever owns the solar system in return for a lower cost of energy. And so we think of this, it's like an ATM on the roof, and our agreement is good for 15 years. And every year we wait, we only have 14. It's like an annuity. We started with 15, then we have 14, then we have 13 years left to pledge. So every year that goes by, puts pressure on the economic savings. That said, as soon as a roof is ready, we can install our solar system. I had a brief call with Mike just to kind of catch up, and I was hoping that there would be some roof. We said, is there any roof that's good? Could we do a phase solar system? He said, no, all of the roof needs to be replaced. So that being said, the simplest way, although it's not the most necessarily financially beneficial way to do solar, but is to have a third party own, invest in the system, own and maintain it, and you enjoy some savings. If you want to pay cash, if you want to bond this system and own the system, like you're going to own your roof or like you pay for a parking lot, you would own the solar system and you would get all of the credits, and the energy that comes from it would be free after you've paid for the system cost. But that requires writing a check for $600,000 and then another $15,000 a year to maintain this system. So you can take that off your balance sheet and off your Board of Finance capital request by entering into a PPA. We can build solar systems subject to snow and ice throughout the year. We don't want to be doing electrical work in January, but we can be doing racking and solar installation as long as it's not snowing. And then when the weather gets bad, we get into the electrical room and do our electrical tie-ins. So if you had a roof that was ready in September, October, November, we could get up there and install the solar system. Solar doesn't have to be done. So we've intended a ballasted solar system, which means there's not a lot of mechanical penetrations. It's sort of just laying on the roof. So there's not a lot of banging that will disturb school operations. So what I'm saying is that we can install solar subject to weather. We can install solar any month of the year. But the roof repair, the roof rip off and replacement work is pretty significant construction, subject to your tolerance of that. And so I guess we're trying to box everything into or the roof work into a summer window, just from a logistical perspective. So that's, a question, something to discuss with Mike. I guess just to be super aggressive and, into this is Mike needs, I guess you guys need to get the grant so that you can hire Fryer to design the roofing and go to bid. I'm ready today to release an RFP to secure solar pricing. We can get pricing we can release an RFP today. Nobody's going to order the equipment for a solar system until they've been awarded the contract, which takes time, because we're going to do an RFP. We're going to normalize the responses, right? We're going to go through the public bidding. We're going to have site visits and everybody the opportunity for due diligence. Then we're going to negotiate a contract with all sorts of performance guarantees. That's going to take time. Town attorney will be involved in that agreement. It's not until we execute the agreement with our solar EPC contractor, engineering, procurement, and construction contractor, and they then design a system and submit those specs to Eversource, and then Eversource issues a conditional letter of approval. It's not until that time that they actually submit their order for materials. You know what that's like. Right now, I could get solar panels in a week, but I can't get it takes me 4 months to get a disconnect switch right now. So we could be in a position, if we released an RFP within the next month, we could certainly be in a position to install solar this summer if we released an RFP this month. And you need to engage MHR to prepare and release the RFP. There have been some new developments in technology that we'd include in that RFP. We'd request PPA pricing for a 20 or 25-year term where there's an investor that owns and maintains it. And we'd also be requesting pricing if the town intends to buy the system, bond it and buy it and own it themselves. So we're going to ask everyone to bid both a PPA agreement versus, think of it as a lease versus a purchase price. And then we're also going to ask them to give us a buyout option. Let's say we start with a lease or a PPA for the first couple of years, and then we decide once they've depreciated it, you want to buy it since it's been depreciated. So you'll have a buyout, like leasing a car, and then you can elect to buy it out after you've got proof of concept that it's working properly. We'll have that option. Additionally, I think it would be prudent to request battery pricing. So tomorrow, the state's issuing a webinar on how they're supporting battery technology, and battery is under the new energy program. Batteries will enjoy investment tax credits like solar does. So I think it would be prudent to request solar and battery pricing. So all of that, we can release that RFP right now, once you release me to do that, and we would have pricing. The problem is we're going to have to get an index in there for an escalator or a chance for the contractor to renegotiate if we don't have a roof ready this summer. We can release it, at least get pricing for this summer, and then have a formula in there for what it would be if we delay a year or delay 2 years. But so there is a way that I could release and get you pricing for solar in a PPA or a purchase option with or without batteries. So, I'm anxious to do that. The question is, will we have a roof? Sounds like Mike would need to be engaged to release an RFP for the roof right now. And I guess we're not releasing him to do that because you need the grant. But maybe I'm being really aggressive here. Is there a way to get bridge funding for the grant? Or could the town decide to pay his services right now and retroactively seek reimbursement from the grant? That may be a way to accelerate.
Greg, go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. My question is for Mike and Mark. So I'm coming late to the project and trying to get caught up here. I had thought that Mike, when Fryer and Associates did their work, they were at all times incorporating the solar into the project. Is it fair to say the estimate you finished today doesn't really account for solar panels sitting on the roof, and that you'd have to go back to task to reevaluate that? Because I understand exactly what's happening now. We need a roof to put the solar on, but if you and Mike and Mark haven't been in the loop designing a roof that would hold solar panels, we may be at an impasse here.
So I was not aware that the solar portion of the project was going to the state for reimbursement. And so it is not included in my estimate. There's different deliveries for solar products. You can lease them, or you can have a state reimbursement and have it, purchase it through the state, through a project. There's a bunch of different ways to procure. When I was initially engaged, it did not include a solar array. It's reimbursement for a roof. If you want
Mike, I thought we talked about the fact that we wanted solar from the get-go.
to include that, I'm sorry?
Mike, did we not talk about the fact that we wanted solar from the get-go? Mike?
I honestly don't remember that being part of the request, that it was part of the application to do solar and roofing.
Yes.
And if I missed that, my apologies.
I'm with Marion on this one. So the estimate you finished today is roof only, not necessarily roof with preparation for solar. I just want to be accurate to know where we're at in the project.
It's roof with preparation for solar, but it's not for the solar.
So you're talking about two different things here. So when we
Correct.
first entered into these discussions, we were talking about a power purchase agreement for solar. And now we're talking about bonding to pay for the solar. And that's what
Yeah.
Mike is saying. He did not.
And a power
include
purchase
in his
agreement is
estimate.
something, if you're getting reimbursed. Yeah, power purchase agreement is not something that's part of the reimbursement structure. If you're getting reimbursed for the product through a different means, then it's not part of the state grant. Does that make sense?
So only in this last week has possibly bonding for purchasing the solar come up. Since we began talking about solar, we always talked about doing it through a power purchase agreement.
Yeah, so the state grant wouldn't cover it. So you asked me to get you the state grant for the roof, which the power agreement, your roof goes down, and then you come in with your solar and you put it on top of the get you the grant money, help you apply for the grant to get the grant money for the roof itself, taking into account any structural modifications that need to be made to support the weight of the solar array that's going on top of it, and any additional penetrations. I had asked Mark directly when I talked to him, was he thinking of a ballasted system, or was he going to mechanically fasten the system? He said the intention was a ballasted system, which doesn't affect my cost estimate. So what I've put together here for you already is good for Mark to come in and put his solar array on top of it. The solar array is going to be paid from pot of money A, and the roof is going to be paid from pot of money B. So they're not related. And and if you're gonna do a power purchase agreement, and have the state put it up, it's gonna be ineligible costs, because you're getting the money from a different source.
And the decision on how we're going to fund this is going to be made by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. That's all this committee does is make recommendations. Craig, does that help clarify that for you?
It does, because we have to pursue the roof project with all due haste, with the hope of funding the solar after on top of it, either by purchasing it or lease with buying with the PPA. So I just want to make sure that the roof Mike has already invested time in designing can hold the solar here, that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot.
So just to clarify that, I have not been engaged to design the roof. The only thing I was engaged to do was to help you do the paperwork and the filing for the state grant to do the roof. You have not hired me or an architect to design the roof yet.
Right. That's really the next step after we get this ed spec filed and get it approved. That will be the next step.
Yeah, the state's going to require you to go out to bid for architectural services. Unfortunately, we're a commodity still in the state, in the eyes of the state. So you bid out architectural, so you put out an RFP. 2 or 3 architectural firms come in and give you a price to give you professional services to design that roof. So that's your next step. That's
And Mike,
usually
with the state, we're required to take the lowest bid, correct? Or pay the difference ourselves?
no. With construction, you're required to take the lowest bid, lowest qualified bid. With architectural services, you're required to get pricing, but pricing is only one of the factors for hiring. You don't have to take the lowest bid if you feel one architecture firm is going to give you better service than another, or one's going to give you this roof and it'll give you that roof. One has a history of a lot of change orders. There's a lot of things. We're still considered a professional service, so our fee for it is only one of the factors that you select by. Where with contractors, it is the lowest bidder that you're required to take. So,
well, that's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. I could help you also to help you with an RFP for architectural services. A lot of municipalities put out the RFP for it. So a lot of them don't do it until after the state has at least given you a state project number. So when you're doing a state project, you're going to have to get the state to sign off on the project, and the project needs to be reviewed by the state. They're going to give you a letter saying that you can go out to bid. That's to go out to bid for the contract. You don't have to wait to hire the architect. You have to wait to hire the contractor, because the letter that they give you states that you go out to bid for construction.
Mike,
So I think.
so when and who is responsible for the RFP for architectural services? When does that happen?
So for non-priority list projects, you can go out it's whoever is the authority. So for you, one of the resolutions that's in here is that that the municipality has to establish a building committee that's in charge of the project. So the selectmen are going to make you may have a standing building committee. I think this is what I'm talking to right now. You guys are the standing building committee. The selectmen are going to say that you guys are the building committee that's going to oversee the project, and they're going to give you all the authorization to oversee the project. From there, now you guys have the authorization to put out an RFP for architectural services. Collect your qualifications from different firms, review them, shortlist up to 4 firms that you want to interview. If you want to do that, get a price from them, and then select them, get them under contract.
So the RFP for architectural services was not part of your original scope here?
That is correct.
Okay, because I think that my opinion is that that RFP needs to be drafted by a someone with qualifications as, you know, you may have, and that needs to happen yesterday. I mean, I'm very concerned that it's taken 4 months to get to where we are now, and we're really, you know, we haven't hit the meat of this yet.
I strongly recommend that, this group or the board, reach out to Bob Faceto at the state. I left his phone number. I can get it back out to you. Contact him. He's at the Connecticut, grants. I mean, I can help you with an RFP. It doesn't put me in conflict because, you know, I've seen these RFPs go out. It's pretty standard language. You have to put it in the local newspaper, get architects to come in and bid out the project. Bob Faceto at the state can kind of educate you, can come down and educate you on the process. Right now, you can get an architect on board. You are going, until you have a state project number, you have no guarantee that the state is going to reimburse you for the architectural fees until you actually have a state project number. So you're kind of a little bit at risk. It's not that they're not going to give you, the money to do it because you're fully qualified to do it, but you're just as a matter of course, you're at risk until you actually reach out to Bob and get a state project number. Get it?
Sure.
Yep.
It seems to me at this point that we don't even really have a very robust scope of work, and which we would need to do the RFP for the architect. We need, you know, one of the sections in the document that you put out was plumbing. Stormwater piping may be required. You know, all these are elements of the RFP to go to an architect. If we don't define those, then I'm not sure how we're going to have an effective RFP.
Well, isn't that what part of what the walkthrough was about, Mike, for firms to be able to look and see what the ins and outs of the project are and be able to put their costs together based on what's actually in place?
Yeah, with everything that I've given you so far, you're really just, the only thing that you really need to know, put in the RFP is you need to understand exactly what kind of roof you want to put on this building. And the only thing you're getting from the architects is a fee for them to do the drawings to put it out to bid. And so any of us come in there and tell you, all right, so for roof A, it's an Energy Star roof. It's going to reflect the heat energy, and you're going to have the insulation that's going to meet the energy code. You're going to, all of that's going to come with the RFP. You don't need to dive too deep into that. All of us can give you the same service essentially. I don't think it's going to be that complex to put out the RFP. If you're uncomfortable with that, there's groups of people, owners, project managers. You can probably reach out to you know, Colliers. You can reach out to Connecticut School Construction Group. Any of them can help you with the filing of the RFP for architectural services. If you're not comfortable with me giving you an RFP.
No, it's not. What I'm trying to address is not the process of filing it, because I'm assuming you have expertise in that. It's about what are the elements that define the architect scope that we are requesting a proposal for.
Yeah, it's just the roof.
Just the roof. Not just the roof. It's the suitability of the existing stormwater piping. Correct? I mean, that's not an element that an architect's typically going to, if we just say we want a roof, or is it? Or is it? I don't know.
It is.
It is. I can tell you that all of us know that the stormwater pipe on that roof has to be replaced.
So
it's not qualified. It doesn't qualify for the way that, because what's going to happen is we're going to give you a new roof with thicker insulation than you currently have. So all of those drain pipes got to come out. We have to do a set of overflow piping that currently doesn't exist. That's all going to have to be done. We all know that. You're not going to get caught from architects giving you a change order to draw that stuff up. What the architect's job is to draw it up so that the contractors who are building it know what to build.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. You're going to be okay.
won't argue that
All right,
point.
I've
I've been
Craig-
around enough to know better, but
Craig, Mike had given us a phone number for the gentleman at the state a while back. And and I know that he had given that both to you and to Catherine and recommended that somebody reach out. Do you know if Catherine did?
I do not, but I'll be calling Mr. Pacito tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think so. I think we're really at the item number 3 on our agenda, which is next steps. And I think next steps are potentially for us to get together, maybe in a smaller group, and get this paperwork finalized and make our recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, so that the Board of Selectmen can do their piece of this, so that we can get this filed and get our ed specs completed. And, you know, I'm certainly willing to look at my schedule for next week, Craig, and, you know, perhaps you and Mike and Jen and I, and even maybe Mike Melody can get together in person and get this paperwork to the point that that I can go to the Board of Selectmen's next meeting and get them to act on their piece of this.
Agreed.
Well, I think it would be good to have the Board of Ed, whatever their piece needs to be done, has to be done next week too, because the next.
Yeah, but I think that's not a problem. I mean, that's a pretty simple thing. And between you and Craig and Jen, you're in control of that. I think that's pretty simple and straightforward. The Board of Selectmen, I think, have 2 resolutions. And Mike, maybe you can clarify this for me. You know, right now the Board of Selectmen has us as an advisory building committee, but in fact, we're going to have some authority as we move forward to actually manage this project and not just be advisory to the Board of Selectmen. Is that correct?
That is correct. The resolution is very clear on that. I mean, I don't know, you know, if it's going to be you guys, but they have to establish a building committee that has the authority. They want it to be an independent, it's a requirement of the grant, that there's an independent building committee that oversees the project.
Yeah, so you know, so I think that's really important. And Craig, I'm hoping that when we go to the Board of Selectmen, you'll be able to go with me so that we can, you know, make sure we get all these moving pieces fitting together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
So,
I don't
and
know
it's-
if Craig said, I didn't quite hear what Craig said, but I don't think Catherine did contact the guy at the state. Did you
Well, it
say
sounds
that?
like Craig will do it tomorrow.
Okay,
Sounds like Craig will do it tomorrow, and that piece of it will get done right away. So, and then we'll just, if we can meet next week, we can find a time in all of our busy schedules to meet next week. Because the following week, it's only going to get worse and push it down the road a little further. So let's see what we can do to try to get together next week and get all of this in an organized fashion so that the Board of Education is in a position to act. We can take it to the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen can act. And then that gets us to the point where we can take the next steps.
so can we get Mike to go ahead and do the RFP though? For the architect?
I'll send you a sample RFP that you can advertise in the paper and get it.
Perfect.
You know, make
That's very helpful, Mike.
sure. No
And if
problem.
we went ahead and let Mark write the RFP for the solar, you know, then we could get some, like you said, we could get the, what the expenses would be, even if we
I
don't.
believe Mark already has the RFP for the solar done. It's just a matter of when he sends it out. Is that correct, Mark?
No, so this is super good. We're having the call. James, thanks for Jim for setting all this up, and for us to, you know, it's complicated. Oh my gosh, there's like so many committees and moving parts, and but if I may just have a minute. So
Yes, absolutely.
okay, so what Mike said is that we're all on the same page, and Ron's comments were like really specific, engineered, and excellent comments. So if I can just cut through the chase, 15 years of experience in deploying these projects, the path of least resistance that also gives you the most flexibility. I recommend we release an RFP for solar and we push the obligation of procurement, investing, and maintaining the system on a third-party investor, so it's off your balance sheet. And we also capitalize the cost of the RFP. I need to submit a proposal to you to develop, manage, and facilitate the RFP for solar. You will pay me for that, but you will be reimbursed by whoever lands the contract. So whoever we execute a solar agreement with, whatever engineering / investor pair firm we execute a solar contract with, they're going to buy the solar panels. They're going to pay for any interconnection requirements. They're going to reimburse you for MHR's fee to develop the RFP. So it's really cool. We can capitalize all these expenses and they will pay for everything, including reimburse you for whatever fees we state in the RFP that you're seeking a reimbursement for. So that's the super clean way to do it. So it's off your balance sheet and not part of your capital needs for today. What I recommend is we structure this so that you have the right to buy it back in a couple of years. Once we get to proof of concept, it's commissioned, there's no faults, it's all working smoothly, then you would have a strike price. Like when you lease a car and you're like, this is a great deal, it's it's a great car, and you want to buy it at a 50% discount. You have the right to exercise your purchase option in 3 years when you're leasing a car. We will do that with a solar system. So the town will preserve long-term flexibility at any time if they realize they can borrow at 2%, and if they invested in the solar system with their 2% funds, taxpayer dollars, they're going to get an 18% return. That's pretty easy math. The Board of Finance could make that investment and invest in their own solar system and enjoy an enormous savings. Frankly, if you went high level, you entered into a PPA today where somebody else invests in the equipment and maintains it, you're going to get $30,000 a year in savings. But if you executed your right to buy the system at a 50% discount once the investor has written it off and gotten their tax depreciation, you buy it at 50 cents on the dollar. Let's say you're investing $300,000 in it in 3 years, but you will get all of the credits will be reassigned to you, and all of the energy, instead of being 8 or 9 cents a kilowatt hour, is free. So you may say that you don't want to spend $650,000 today. You want to wait 3 years till it's up and running and it's been depreciated. Buy this system for $250,000, okay, but get $80,000 a year in savings and credits. So that's sort of optimal, right? But we can do all of this with a solar PPA. You don't have to decide now. Although I think in the RFP, we're going to, just so we know as a marker, we're going to ask for PPA pricing and purchase option pricing. But because towns are subject to prevailing wage, the way to get around that and to sort of save 20% on the install cost is to have a private investor, like a vending machine, own and maintain the system for the first couple of years. And then we buy it off them once it's depreciated. And then it's a way that you're not subject to prevailing wage. So that's the best of both worlds. But what Mike said is that he's not seeking a grant to pay for the solar system, but he was intending to design a roofing system that's solar compatible. So that's
Correct.
perfect. So Mike should just stay on that pathway. Let's not overburden the ask by trying to get state money for a solar system, and then it's like going to really tip the scale, and then it's subject to prevailing wage and all this stuff. And unless you guys have an in-house engineering department and really want to be responsible for maintaining a solar system and paying for the maintenance of it, let's let somebody else shoulder that burden, and let's see if it works perfectly. And if it's up and running smoothly for the first few years, then you can execute your buyout option. once the price is discounted. But I think Mike should just I would like to work with Mike once he's hired to develop the specification for the for the roof system to make sure it's solar compliant. And then I would like you to release me for my next phase, which is release me to release an RFP. And I will do the RFP for the solar, and we're going to solicit competitive pricing for investors who are going to own and maintain the solar system, and also give us a buyout option. And plus, there's a new thing, these battery storage option, that'll be an ad alternate. But my next step is to give you a proposal and for you to release me so that I can release the solar RFP. And the cost of this next phase for me, everything it will be reimbursed to you. Once you.
But I remember that from our previous conversations. You know, this sounds like it gives us the greatest flexibility and ease of moving forward at a much more rapid pace, which I think is something that we're all interested in doing at this point. You know, we've spent some time talking about this at the beginning. We've spent some time here getting to this point and getting the ed specs up to the point where we're ready to do something with them. And so from my perspective, this makes a lot of sense, Mark. And if everybody's in agreement, I think what I'd like you to do is to just send me an email with that in bulleted format so that we don't lose any piece of it when we're talking with the Board of Selectmen. That would be really helpful for us.
Yep, so I'll send you a proposal, you know, just to be very direct. It's about it with the battery storage and solar, and plus Craig's suggestion of, hey, let's pull the covers off this thing and figure out if we did want to buy it, what's the cost benefit to us with the schedule. Maybe we don't want to buy it today, but let's let them. So all of this solar stuff gets a 30% investment tax credit. So the investor, whether it's the Credit Green Bank or Wells Fargo or Goldman Sachs, they invest 100 grand in a solar system. They get a $30,000 tax credit year one, which you don't get as a municipality because you're not taxable. So it really only costs them 70 grand. And then instead of having to depreciate it like commercial real estate over a 20 or 50 year period, they get to write the whole thing off in 3 years, which means they've written it off down to zero in 3 to 4 years. That's when you want to jump in and buy it for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
Anyway,
makes the most sense.
About 70 plus or minus, like I've got to figure out the time for the battery thing and the bidder conference and all that, and work with your lawyer, but it's about $7,500 for MHR to develop the spec, the RFP, conduct the competitive bids with on-site meetings, advertise it, and so forth, and then, you know, normalize those responses and negotiate a contract. That 75.
And that, Mark, that might have already been approved by the Board of Selectmen. I just can't remember.
Okay. And what we do is when we award the contract, we say you've got to build and maintain all this stuff, plus you've got to pay any fees, plus you've got to reimburse the town for any expenses they've incurred to get to this point. And we bake that all into the very transparent RFP. So your short-term out-of-pocket, the $7,500 for this service, but you're reimbursed. So that's the simplest
That
thing.
sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions regarding the roof or solar and what our next steps are at this point?
Yeah, I just have a question about a phasing schedule. And it seems as though we've got, you know, Mark and Mike with expertise on, you know, their respective roles in solar and roofing. Would it be possible for those two guys to put together a very high-level phasing schedule so we can all understand order of operations and what has to happen when? It doesn't necessarily have to have dates in it, but it should have events so we know order of operations and what the next steps are beyond, just the immediate next step.
Absolutely.
So
You
that
got
also
it.
sounds good to me.
Yeah, you got it. No
Great,
problem.
thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns?
Well, you've achieved a whole lot in this meeting, and I'm grateful for it. And it gives us all, I was like anxious because I'm anxious to get to proof of concept for your solar system, but there's a little bit of a chicken or egg thing here. But okay, so Mike, you mentioned reflectivity, that you were going to specify a membrane that has the reflective components so that it's basically meets Energy Star criteria. So you kick the door open. This is the third thing, and maybe it's not for today, maybe it's for your next meeting. But if we've gotten a pathway for getting your roof system going, and I've got approval, or if I've got a pathway here subject to approval for getting pricing and getting an RFP released early, getting to work on that at least, because it's going to have to be reviewed by your committees and town attorney. But I've got a pathway to move forward to release an RFP, to develop and release an RFP for solar. The third piece is getting inside the building. So Mike alluded to, and when he said Energy Star qualified roof, that we can get some credit, not a whole lot, $2 or $3 a square foot.
Good
But
job.
I'm thinking, I'm putting together a ledger of my wish list of all the upgrades for the building and what rebates we can get you. So we can get $2 to $3 a square foot if we're a solar roof, if we're a reflective roof that meets Energy Star. So Eversource, not the state, but if I could start to frame our wish list, to put a memorandum of agreement together, we start drafting it for Eversource. We could start framing this comprehensive master plan, this deep energy retrofit for Ashford School. And we list out all the things we'd like to do over the next 12 to 24 months. Roof, control upgrades, ERVs, energy management system, kitchen exhaust hood controls. So we start to characterize all of that, and then we develop an and then we develop a scope of work that's going to be implemented in the school, whether it's battery storage and all this stuff. We can start to codify it. Then Eversource is required to price match us on some of that. So we could start to put together this sort of energy audit, or update an energy audit, and add to things like Mike Melody has done with the LED lighting. Once we list out all our measures, we memorialize that in a plan to Eversource. They say how much they will price match us, 30, 40, 50, 60%. And then they turn around and say, gee, you got $1 million project here, you're doing windows, you're doing boiler controls, you're converting to electric air conditioning systems or whatever. This is a third step, or a third agreement I'd like to present to you, when it's appropriate, is the sort of energy master plan. But Eversource will do two things. One is we'll come to them with $1 million deep energy retrofit master plan. And they need to know when we want to roll it out in the next 12, 18 or 24 months. And then they say, okay, we're gonna meet you. We're gonna grant you $300,000 of that $1 million project. And we say, great, we now have $700,000 we need to come up with. And then they can offer us up. They can actually, Eversource is offering $500,000 interest-free on-bill financing for qualified energy projects. And that's without a negotiation. So anyway, I think the next step is what I'm saying, is that it might be good to start thinking about the energy audit piece. What are we going to do with all this solar energy, all this power, and start to put a plan together and document the incentives that we can get from Eversource. And all of that's probably going to take 6 months. So it'd probably be a good thing to start thinking about it, so you don't end up like with an emergency just putting in variable speed drives, or a new pump, or a new whatever it is, so that you can start moving with a plan, knowing that it's going to be qualified for incentives. But we have to submit our master plan to Eversource to be able to trigger and solicit a rebate on anything. We can't do it after the fact.
So who would be developing that master plan? Would that be you, Mark?
Well, one way, you know, not to be bashful, but you did great work with an energy audit a few years ago. What I'd like to do is to take that and refresh it against current incentives, and then add some things that have come out in the market recently. Power factor correction, ERVs, talk about some fresh air requirements for the school, like ionization, and then also look at potential battery storage and how that may work in with the future of electrification, like electric buses and so forth. So we can at least start to sort of get a plan together, and then we could start. We send that to Eversource and say, here's our wish list. How much are you going to meet us? 30%, or you want to meet us halfway? And then we get an agreement in place with Eversource, and they say, yeah, if you're going to do these 5 things over the next 24 months, we'll pay 50% of the cost. And then we can go to Board of Finance and say, this is our wish list. Here's the savings we're going to get from it. And here's what Eversource is willing to pay for. Then we know what our ask is when we go to Board of Finance. But anyway, it's complicated. We're going to probably have ugly things to deal with, like codes and asbestos abatement and so forth. But we could at least start to refresh that audit, use it as a stepping stone. But that audit would be, we would expand upon that audit and update it in the context of current incentives.
So does that mean then that you would do the audit then?
Yes, we do that. Yep, we do that.
So Mark, it seems to me that when we first started talking about this, you gave us 3 separate proposals, and the first 2 of those proposals were approved in last year's capital plan, and I believe the third piece of that proposal was approved in the Board of Selectmen's budget with this year's capital plan. And it seems to me that we're still talking about the same things that you had given us proposals on originally, and that we had brought to the Board of Finance for inclusion into the capital plan about this time last year. Does that jive with what your memory is, Mark?
That's great to hear. Forgive me, pretty crazy year. In my little mind, I recollect sort of giving some high level concepts of those 3 things. And I think we were moving in steps.
We were, yes.
Yeah. And then
because we couldn't fund it all last year.
Okay.
So it seemed to me that we approved 2 of those in last year's capital budget. But you know, you and I will have to get together and dig through our paperwork and see what we got and see what's been approved by the Board of Selectmen and the taxpayers, so that we can figure out what's left to fund and where we're going to get the money from.
Terrific. Okay.
And if you need access to the building, I think Mike Melody would be happy to let you in, right?
Okay. Well, I'm ready, willing, and able, very eager. In my mind, and forgive me if it was wrong, but I was in the first swim lane, which was to get the credits.
Right. That was the first piece, and I'm pretty sure we had executed that contract with you.
You did.
And obviously we did. But I think we approved the monies for that phase 2 piece, and we just hadn't executed the contract for that yet, because we wanted to get this piece done first. But that's just what my memory's saying, but I've got so much swimming through my brain right now that I don't know that I'm remembering accurately. So I'm gonna have to go back to Chris at the selectman's office and see if she has the same recollection as I do.
Okay.
And we can actually look at the documents and get that figured out. I think the next thing for us to talk about, and I certainly don't mind if Mike and Mark want to stay for this. You know, we've got we've got this oil tank that's hanging over our head, and Mike Melody and Jen were trying to get an extra year out of the oil tank. But my understanding from a recent conversation with Jen is that those opportunities failed. So we've got to get this oil tank out in 2023. So we've got to get that funded. And I know we had talked about not necessarily wanting to put an oil tank back in because we were potentially looking at, some more energy efficient solutions for heating and cooling than using oil fired boilers. So my thinking is that obviously we've got to get the tank out by the date that it's required, get it out of service. I know, Mike, I had looked at some pricing for you back because I looked back at Willington's oil tank replacement, and my recollection is that was something just shy of $200,000. I can go back and look at that again, but that's old data at this point. It's about 5 years old. With that said, I'm wondering if there's a possibility that we can put some sort of temporary above ground tank in to get us through until we're making decisions on what we're going to do long term with heating and cooling and energy solutions. Now I'm going to open it up for discussion.
Well, if it has to be done by 2023, is there any way to go ahead and just put in geothermal after it comes out? Or, what would that process be?
Well, that's a whole design and funding process that I don't think we're ready to engage in yet.
I can tell you some of the rules from the state.
Go ahead, sorry.
The state doesn't reimburse for just ripping out a tank if you're going to go with natural gas or another source of energy. They will reimburse for a project where you're replacing it with a new tank. So there is a state project there where you will get reimbursed for the tank work.
And I guess this is where we would ask Mark to jump in. Are we better off looking at other solutions for heating and cooling? Are we better off, trying to make our envelope more energy efficient and continuing to utilize, oil fired heating for our structure?
So this is I'm adding to the scope of the energy audit, which would be to high level. So phase one energy audit will now include high level feasibility, rough budgetary parameters and payback analysis for geothermal. So we can roll that in high level to feasibility, a feasibility assessment for converting to geothermal. That should be part of the comprehensive energy audit. Absolutely. What happens with and so if we and it's all like here's a real shocking thing. We underwrite savings analysis when we present a solar system, and we estimate and we show what the 25-year payback is, and we assume a 2.9% escalation in electric prices. That's been a standard underwriting number for the Connecticut Green Bank and so forth. Eversource just released that they're raising electric rates 36% from last year, this time last year, year over year, where it's almost 50% if you looked at the summer rates versus today. Now, that's if you are a default customer, you didn't have a supply contract in place. I'm pretty sure you pay Eversource for transmission, but you probably have a third-party contract with Constellation or Energy or whoever generates the power, which means that you won't be hit with that staggering, but you probably have 3-year or 5-year contracts, which means when that contract burns out, just anticipate that rates are going to be skyrocketing. So all the more reason to think about energy efficiency. And the good news is doing things like solar, we're going to look terrific because we're projecting, when we gave you estimates on how much you're going to save with the solar system, typically my proposals show a 2.9% estimated inflation, and it's actually 10 times that. So we're doing the right thing. So don't despair about, if you're a year or 8 months late in getting on it. As soon as you get on it, the sooner you'll have savings. Yeah.
Excuse me, just wondering, part of the elements of consideration for moving away from oil would be the remaining service life in the boilers and existing circular pumps, et cetera, if they're 5 years away from needing replacement. It's a much different calculation on oil than if they're 20 years away from needing replacement. So it's, the oil tank in isolation is one thing, but what it's feeding, if those boilers are also economically or functionally obsolete, then doesn't make a lot of sense to prolong that agony. But if have just been replaced in the past 5 or 8 or 10 years, there might be a different equation.
So, Mike, do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, we just replaced 2 of the boilers. The building runs on 4 boilers, and approximately 2 of them run half the building and the other 2 run the other half. And we had a flood in the basement, and we just put in brand new boilers as of a month ago. So we're up and running on brand new boilers right now. But that being said, just because I have brand new boilers, it doesn't mean I have brand new piping in the building. There's always going to be something going wrong with circulator pumps and stuff like that. But we have time. If we were going to replace the tank, we do have time to think about it. And the way the building's broken up, I'm thinking, you could change half the building and knock out 2 of the boilers. And, and then down the road, when the other boilers are getting older, you can do it in phases. You wouldn't have to do the whole thing at once. But right now we're up and running. We're very lucky with trying to get new boilers, and we just hit it perfect. And I'm happy that we're able to get up and running before it got cold. And I also have a new circulator pump coming. It's taken a while to build, but that's going to probably be going in next spring. Even if it comes out now, I don't really want to replace it right now in the middle of the heating system
Sure.
season. But anything else, Craig?
Yeah, that's the heat exchanger that's coming in due to a lightning strike and a double flood and a drain pipe we had to replace. We got a whole new boiler system. So the furnace room is essentially brand new, which not at the end of its lifespan. I mean, actually brand new. But it doesn't mean we still can't do what Mike said and phase in geothermal or the ductless mini splits. To do that, though, we'd have to oversize our solar capacity a little bit to make sure we have enough capacity to run that. So Mark is well aware of that. Marion and I met with him last week and we discussed that.
Sure. So it's a balancing act of all these different, components of the overall system. And I guess my key point or the takeaway is just, there's a lot of different factors that determine whether or not it's worth replacing the oil tank and going to geothermal. And part of those, are the other elements of the system. What is their expected life expectancy and their efficiency, et cetera. So I'm sure that'll all be part of the evaluation that Mark will be looking at.
So geothermal, in fairness, not to talk against it, but geothermal is a complicated electric system, and we're shifting our fuel source. Now we're enjoying the benefit of, once we get 3 or 4 feet below the frost line, we've got 55 degrees to work from, so we got free heating and cooling. But we've got to circulate that energy from underneath the ground into your building. That takes electricity. So we'd be divorcing ourselves from fossil fuels, from oil, and all the externalities, the replacement of oil tank, the associated insurance expense for having oil tanks on site and the fire risk and all that, and the maintenance of maintaining sooty flues that have to be cleaned and burners that have to be cleaned. So there's a maintenance, oil boilers are higher maintenance than electric systems, but a geothermal system will require a more robust electrical infrastructure. So there's going to be upgrades we have to anticipate to the electrical service to support all of this electrification. You will have a higher upfront cost per BTU. The cheapest thing is just get oil, liquid oil, and burn it and pollute the environment and have high maintenance costs and have fragile oil tanks that need to be addressed and high insurance. But the fuel source is pretty cheap. It's pretty energy efficient. But there's the maintenance, the environmental impact, the heart and lungs, the asthmatic concerns of burning heavy oil in the school have to be weighed against the cheap first cost of the fuel. Now, if you have what we do look at is phasing into this world, looking in phases, doesn't mean that you have to remove your oil equipment. We have to study all the feasibility of all of this. But in the case where we have, so we've got a school district in New Haven right now. They had no air conditioning. And it was, for argument's sake, it was $1 million to put in air conditioning. And for $1,050,000, that system can produce air conditioning and heating, mini splits, right? And so we designed this mini split system to provide heating and cooling. But when it gets to the super cold, like 3 of the coldest days of the year, when the mini split system can't keep up, instead of paying for the very expensive hyperheat system, we back up with their gas-fired conventional hydronic heating system. So we didn't rip it out. We kept in that case, it was gas-fired radiant baseboard heating systems. We kept it in place to satisfy the demands on the coldest days of the year. So we didn't have to spend an exorbitant amount for this very sophisticated Mitsubishi hyperheat system, but we kept it as a backup. So this is just an analogy, but what I'm saying is that it's not completely yes or no, like we can keep systems in place as backup, or they can be part of the overall energy profile of the building.
Could potentially the existing oil boilers be converted to natural gas?
So
to get rid of the oil tank and, et cetera. I don't expect you to have all those answers. I just think it's going to be in the universe of questions that we're exploring and answering, so we can look at, the overall landscape and make an educated decision that, the best choice is to get rid of the oil tank and convert some portion of those boilers to gas or propane. I don't know that natural gas is available, but propane, and then the balance of that would be geothermal for the temperature ranges that you're speaking of, and the boilers would be a backup to that.
Right, absolutely. And so a selling point of electrification is there are no incentives or rebates in place for oil.
Correct, yeah.
So while electrification, and there's various scenarios, there's air source heat pumps, there's mini splits, there's geothermal, or all of the above, all of that stuff is theoretically eligible for Eversource incentives. So it's expensive, state-of-the-art, complex equipment. And part of that gets into demand-controlled ventilation, where we have occupancy sensors in all spaces, and we can very specifically heat or cool various rooms based on occupancy or CO2 without simply heating the whole building. It's not a binary decision, but it's expensive and complex. However, there are incentives. There are no incentives, well, unless your oil company, your oil supplier is offering you incentives There are no regional incentives through the utility companies for staying with oil.
So it sounds to me like what we're saying here is, you know, maybe we want to move to mini splits, or maybe we want to move to geothermal, but if nothing else, we would want to be keeping, especially because we've got 2 brand new boilers, we'd want to be keeping that as a backup or secondary system. And if that's the case, I'm sorry, the cat decided to come visit. If that's the case, then probably really what we should be doing is also, at this point, just looking to put a project together to replace that oil tank, as it stands. And I know that that's something that's been on the books with the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen for some time. So does anybody think that that's not the right move at this point?
I think that's a good idea, Jim.
Unless
Perfect.
there's
Thank you,
gas
Mike.
on the road, you have to
There
get that
isn't,
tank.
no.
Don't. Then you
No,
gotta
there
do the
isn't.
tank.
So,
You almost don't have a choice.
so Mike Serrano, there's so many Mikes here tonight, I'll have to, so Mike Serrano, I guess we'll probably be looking to you for maybe an estimate to help us with the ed specs for that as well, so we can put that together.
Yeah, we've been doing quite a few of those because for some reason, all these tanks are coming up to 30 years across the state all at once. For the size of your tank and what we're doing, it'll probably be, you know, it's going to sound funny, but it's going to be about $6,000 for us to do the ed specs and the drawings and everything you need to do to go out to bid to replace that tank. And then you're going to need to bring in like a Fuss and O'Neill or an Eagle Environmental to do soil sampling and tank closure documentation. And they're going to probably be about $7,500 to do their piece. So in all, the design, professional design support, you're going to use going to be about 12.5 total. And then there's going to be just the tank removal, and then any if there's been any spillage on top of that. So I can get you the pricing that we've had on the last couple of tanks we replaced. Again,
that would be really helpful, because, you know, one of the things that Craig is going to need to do here very quickly is to get those numbers in, because the Board of Finance is starting the budget process for this next fiscal year now. And we want to make sure that we've got updated numbers to include in the capital budget.
Okay, I'll get you something out tomorrow. It's going to be all the same, the authorization.
All the same documents.
All that stuff's going to be exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Yep.
Exactly the same. And it'll be reimbursed as a tank replacement project. So I'll get you some numbers tomorrow.
Appreciate it.
Example of how complex and interactive. And by the way, this is why most people don't ever do what you're doing. They don't have the bandwidth or the ambition to do this radical deep energy retrofit. They just gotta kick the can down the road. But for example, if Mike is going to be bringing your roof up to code and he's going to be increasing the insulation, right? So that's the reason it's like a complicated architectural project, because like you increase the insulation, but you still have to pitch, and then you may have to increase the parapet walls and put in drains and all this stuff. So it's complicated. But if he's increasing the insulation, maybe your boilers are oversized. Your boilers were probably your boilers were probably designed for the building 30 years ago, before so the envelope is going to become more efficient, more responsive if we really are serious about thinking about double pane windows.
Not until we replace some windows. The place is not that sufficient, believe me. We have single pane glass throughout the building that needs to be replaced. So that's another story down the road.
But this is all like, so the phase one and the energy audit is very high level. It's going to be, just sort of going to help characterize the pieces and give us go, no go decisions. And then the next step would be to, design it and then get bids. But like all these things are interactive. So if the intent is at some point, if you agree that your windows are end of life, and if it's either today or 3 years from today, you'd like to replace them, And we're definitely upgrading the roof insulation. By the way, heat rises, right? So the first place to increase the insulation is on the roof. All of that's going to start to new windows and a new roof. It may downsize the BTU requirements for a new heating system.
Yeah, Mark, I think, the key word you just mentioned was interactive. None of these, elements exist in a vacuum. They're all somewhat intertwined, interactive. So the other piece, not to go down yet another path, is the existing HVAC units on the rooftop. With additional insulation, they may be oversized. We don't know what, or at least I don't know what vintage those units are. It's not inexpensive to crane them off, do all the electrical and, I don't know if electrical is the only service going to them or utility, plus controls, to disconnect all that stuff, do the roof, put those units back on. Or is that part of the, the puzzle that needs to be investigated? Is, are there some of those units that's not, the investment of doing what needs to be done to replace the roof? With those worthwhile, or should they be upgraded at the same time?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. Something we'll have to look at in the scope of the opportunity analysis. At the same time, like when Mike's saying, and this is again the complexity and the requirement to have a specifications by an architect. So all those units, regardless of how old they are, and I'm going to get in there, I'm going to say, gee, you should have CO2 sensors, or they're, it's end of life, or yes, if there's enough life here and it's worth retrofitting with a variable speed drive. It's like a dimmer on a light switch.
Right.
And there's going to be an incentive for that VFD. There's going to be an incentive for putting that oxygen control, that demand ventilation. So, and I'm going to tell you, if we can retrofit it or if we should replace it. But those units typically sit on a curb.
Correct.
Now, they have a curb, and I think current code is something like 6 inches. Like that curb's got to be at least 6 inches from snow melt, or and if Mike's going to be raising the insulation, we're not curb,
Exactly what the point I was attempting to make, that you made more eloquently. But all these things fit together, and if the curbs need to be raised or new curbs need to be installed, that's an element of the roof repair. And the curbs required for a 10-ton unit that's 1960s vintage are a lot different than the curbs that are required for a 10-ton unit that's 2021 vintage. Same with the electrical service going to those particular units. So again, it's all, it just seems to me like there needs to be a really comprehensive inventory of what's there, and some sort of a matrix to prioritize things, because some things are pretty independent of other things, but there's a lot of activities that we may be talking about or may have not yet talked about that are very interdependent. We don't want to go down a path which then locks us into something that we aren't anticipating, or we end up doing something twice that we could have just done once.
So Ron, this group met for several times before you joined us.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things that we talked about. And maybe Mike Melody, you can speak to that for a minute, because you provided us a pretty comprehensive list of what's currently on the roof and what their ages were. And most of those things are pretty new, as I recall.
Well, the roof is, it's got several different types up on top of the roof, and it's got Firestone, which had a 25-year warranty that ran out 18 years ago. So we've been up patching, and there's not a lot of insulation. I went with Jeremy Codgill. Has he reached out to you yet?
Yeah, I've been working with him on the cost.
Okay, because he's very knowledgeable, and we did drill holes, and I have probably an inch and a half insulation now. So if you're gonna put 12 to 24 inches of insulation, yeah, it's gonna help a lot. Um, the roof's in pretty bad shape. We had that big storm, and our superintendent, wasn't Craig at the time, brought in a crew that took snow blowers up there to get the snow off the roof. And I've had over 180 holes in that roof since that's happened, and we've been patching. And yeah, I mean, we can talk forever about bad windows, which I've been trying to get for 20 years. That a lot of this stuff takes time, and you can see how it's taken time. We started these meetings a while ago, and we're thinking this summer it's going to maybe next summer. There's a lot of things in the school that would need to be replaced, but we have to prioritize. And I think starting with the roof is the way to go. Solar's a great idea too. That's going to bring us up and save us a lot of money, save the taxpayers some money. And I don't know. I just think
Mike, I was asking you, I mean, I think that's great, but I was asking you to specifically address, like, you and I had talked and you provided a list of all the fans that were on the roof. We're talking about curbs and roof penetrations, but my recollection is from our discussion and the list you provided that you've got all but just a handful of those that have been replaced or retrofitted with new motors.
Yeah, new motors up on a roof. I probably have about 4 or 5 that still need to be replaced. But they do get PM'd every 6 months. And I have 27 units up on the roof. And the gym units, we just replaced, those were the newest ones, maybe a year and a half ago. But as things break, we do replace them, and they do get PM'd every 6 months. But yeah, there's a lot to it up there. I don't know. I think everything's up and running other than about 4 or 5 that we should probably replace when we do the roof. I have a number of a guy that's out of South Windsor that does a really good job with that.
So
Replacing them.
what does PM mean?
Pardon me?
Preventive maintenance.
Oh, okay.
Preventive maintenance.
Preventive maintenance. PM means they go up and if the bearing needs to be replaced, they replace a bearing, change belts. So the thing that
So Mr. Melody,
years out of the unit itself.
Assuming that we end up using Mike Serrano's services for the eventual design of the roof, I think it's going to be important that we share that information with him so that we can potentially include a replacement of those units with some with some input from Mark Robbins about what we put up there for energy efficient units. So I think this is the kind of collaboration we need to build as we move this project forward. But I do think we're at the point where we have our next steps, and I think that's for Craig and I to meet with some key individuals next week so that we can get and ideally before Thursday, right? So that the Board of Education can act on their piece of it on Thursday night. And then as soon as we can get to the Board of Education, the Board of Selectmen after that, we'll go ahead and do that. And Mike Serrano, if you could help us just giving us some broad numbers on oil tank replacement costs, we can get those figures to the Board of Finance so that we can make sure that that project is included in this upcoming, and we can meet Mr. Melly, do you remember what the date in 2023 is that we got to have this completed?
No, I don't off the top of my head. I think it's just by December of 2023.
Okay, so I mean that gives us enough time, I think, to get that done without any issue. But we just, it's one of those things that we can't just let by the wayside. We've got to get that done, and we've got to get the numbers to the Capital Expenditure Committee. Are there any other capital expenditures at the school that we see that need to be in this upcoming year's capital expenditure request to the Board of Finance? And are there updates in the 5-year capital plan that we've got to share with them that you're aware of at this point?
Well, I think most of what we've been trying to develop through the Board of Ed is for the capital expenditures is just related to, replacing the roof and the solar and all that sort of thing, everything that's going to be going along with that. So
Yep.
Mike, Melody, do you know if there's anything
Well, when I
else?
was on the Hvac committee, I think one of the things was the windows in primary. We wanted to replace the parking lot side of that and the windows from room 15 down to room 18, all the way down to 25. Those are all single pane windows that need to replace at one time. But other than that, in the tank, I think, the windows, the roof, and solar would be a great upgrade.
Well, Mike, you'll let Craig know exactly what what those windows are, so we can get that to the capital, because I know they're going to approve that. They've been asking for new windows for a long time, and why we haven't requested them, they want to know.
Well, I believe they're in the 5-year or 10-year capital plan. And if you can't put your hands on that, I'm sure Jen, who was listening to us talk, she's been a part of creating that document ever since I was on the Board of Ed, and probably before that. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for you guys to locate your current capital plan. And because another year has passed, you really need to look at it probably at your Thursday Board of Ed meeting and see if there's anything that moves up, on the list, if you shuffle your priorities at all. So you're going to be asked to turn that in, to the Board of Finance here pretty quick. I know the Board of Finance is also going through some reorganization with changes as a result of the November election. So, they may not have all of their ducks in a row at the moment, but I think if you guys have your ducks in a row, it allows you to be ready to go to the Board of Finance and give them that updated capital plan at a moment's notice.
I know that, I'm very familiar with what our capital plan is. I do have a copy of it, but I don't think it's, we needed to rethink it. So I think we do definitely need to put those windows on it, Mike. So whatever particular windows need to be on there, let's put it on there. And I know that the last time I was at the capital improvements meeting, they were like, why don't we have windows yet? New windows yet. So,
well, I think John Calarese and I represented the school at the last capital expenditure committee meeting.
Yeah.
And I think,
about the windows.
We represented the school even though we were no longer on the board. That was last year when we went to the capital expenditure committee for getting monies approved and putting these things as priorities in the capital plan.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, Jim, I remember that. And the other thing was my fire alarm system needs to be upgraded.
Right. Yep. That was a piece that was in there, and I think that may be for next year or the following year. So again, that requires the Board of Education to look at its 5-year capital plan and shuffle any priorities. And we're talking about another year that's passed, and some of those priorities may have been handled. And I think, the other piece of this is, when we get Mark Robbins engaged in helping us with the high level energy audit stuff, that's going to help us get accurate pricing for those window walls and the things that we have to do there, because he'll be able to help you guys with specifications of what we're looking for windows, rather than, I'm not even sure what's out there anymore, but I'm sure there's stuff, aside from hollow extruded aluminum frames and single pane windows. So, we're looking at, energy efficient options. And this is where and I don't want to get too deep into this tonight, because I think we're at the point where we've really accomplished what we needed to tonight. But this gets back into that conversation that we were having, at the beginning of this process, and what our charge was. we get into some of these things, and that's where we go back to the report that Mike Serrano created for us some years ago about the things that we're looking at. And, when we replace those windows, if we don't have a sprinkler system in yet, then we have to put in emergency escape and rescue openings. If we have the sprinkler system that we're talking about putting in a full sprinkler system throughout the building, that changes some of our code requirements and lets us get away with some other things that we wouldn't be able to get away with, because there's trade-offs for those safety measures. And again, I don't want to get too deep into that tonight, because I think, the two things that are on our plate right now are the three things will be the roof, the solar, and the oil tank replacement. And, that's what we've got to get off the ground, and we've got to, get those things. Look, everybody's been doing a lot of work in the background, and we're at the point where we're bringing those things together so we can take the next steps and actually get the work done. And in the meantime, I think the other pieces of that are the Board of Ed looking at their capital plan. We'll take a look at the funding for Mark to do the next piece of, the three-pronged approach that we talked about when we first met with him and asked him to engage with us as our consultant. If I've missed anything, somebody jump in here.
That's a great recap. So my ears perk up when I hear about windows, because I think that's something that there is some marginal, there's an energy efficiency component. It impacts the overall modeling of the building, and there's going to be a small rebate associated with it, part of the overall rebate package. Just at a very high level, windows have like a 20, like going from a single pane to a double pane window, it's like an 18-year payback. But doing LED lighting, like Mike did, has like a 3-year payback. But there is a payback. Right. And there's many other neat reasons to do it. But things like, so another thing that you probably have done, and if I'm engaged, I'll dig into your history and your books and your audits, and I'll work with Mike and go through his files and his wish list. And we'll sort of put together kind of a hybrid energy audit, capital needs assessment, where we'll identify, things that we're already doing, like the windows, the roof. There's a structural engineering component, and I'm looking forward to having some time to corroborate this a little bit with Mike Serrano, because when we talk about increasing the insulation, or maybe there's going to be some rooftop units that we're going to replace in the future. At a high level, new rooftop units that get a rebate are more efficient. They're heavier because they've multi-stage compressors, they have variable speed drive, and they have all these electronics. So all of this is starting to add weight. And 50 years ago, we were building buildings that had a 20 pound per square foot snow load. That's moving to 30, 35, 40 pounds per square foot snow load. So all these things we're going to have to consider, and means that on the solar system, one of the things I was talking to Mike about is we start with a loading diagram to understand what's the residual capacity of the roof, what sections of the roof can handle how much weight given the code requirements, so excess weight. So solar is pretty light. It's 2 to 5 pounds per square foot. Snow load is like 30 pounds per square foot. So the solar system is not what's going to cave in the roof, right? A foot of snow is what's going to cave in the roof. But we want to make sure there's headroom there. So to get involved in a project, especially if we're doing solar plus upgrading insulation, and we may have some heavier or different rooftop units, we should start with a structural assessment of the of the roof structure, and that would be done by a structural engineer.
So at this point, unless there's anything else, I think we've concluded our meeting for tonight. I think we've handled the business that we need to. I'd be happy to reconvene after, the handful of us that have to get together and do some things, get those things done. Anybody have any last questions or concerns before we adjourn for the evening?
I just have one thought. Do we have to put the panels on the roof, or could we put them on site somewhere else? And we would get a new roof, and then we never have to move them if we ever had to get a new roof again. Um, I see them, they put them in parking lots, put them out in the parking lot. That way we could start on that sooner than putting a roof on and then waiting for the solar panels to come in. We could start on solar right away if we could come up with a game plan and I don't know, put them out in the parking lot somewhere. There's a lot of other space, a lot of other land on the Ashford School site that we could probably, other than the building. That's just a concern for me, putting solar panels on a roof.
I
Any
like
any
that.
thoughts?
I like that idea. I just wanted to say that there's a component to solar that's often not looked at, is the shading coefficient that they provide to your roof, and it's substantial. If you're out on a hot summer day in the sun and you're out on the same hot summer day under a tree, it's infinitely cooler under the tree. Those solar panels throw shade on that roof, and it makes a substantial difference. But you're correct. They could go anywhere on the site. They don't have to go on the roof.
So Mike and I have talked about this extensively, and I shared that with Mark last week. I do know that there's multi-purpose when you put them out in a parking lot, right? You get rain and snow coverage, right? You basically get carports. It is more expensive though to build them and erect them with steel substructures out in a parking lot, but that might be an option.
Just a thought, just trying to move things along, and if there's other options.
And frankly, what at a high level moving forward, moving towards electrification, because it's cleaner and it's lower maintenance, you don't have oil tanks and lower insurance costs, moving towards electrification. But thank God Mike did the LED lighting, because we're going to need all the juice we can. So especially in the future, and there's going to be grants for electric buses, you're going to move away from propane and oil, and you're going to become all electric, which means we may have solar on the roof and on the ground or carports. It's not one or the other. It'll probably end up both. And I could talk to you more. The most cost effective is on the roof, because we don't have to build a structure to support it, and we don't have to go to P&Z for impervious area and building a structure and rainwater and all that stuff. So from a land use perspective and from a cost of install, which means a higher payback for you, the cheapest thing is to put it on the structure you already have and not take down any trees and not have to build any more fences. Just put it on your roof. But in this RFP, just to prove this out and let you be the judge, we can give the respondents your site plan. We have your recs, we have your energy demand. We can say, give us pricing for on the roof, and you can we'll box out an area of a field as long as it's close to the electrical service, because the further away from the electrical panel it is, the more we have to trench, the fatter the cables, the more expensive it is to install, and then there's line loss and electrical loss. So you want that solar system as close to the electrical service as possible, but you may end up with a hybrid of some carports as well as some on the roof.
Okay.
Well, I think it makes sense, to potentially bid it out that way. And then we have the opportunity to make recommendations and decisions. That means we don't have to make that decision today.
You could end up doing a two-phase solar system, and phase one this summer is a ground mount. If you can give up the unshaded land, right? But you don't want it to be by the ball field, because no investor wants to own a solar panel that's going to get hit by a baseball. So we got to figure out where we can really sacrifice half an acre of land that's close to the electrical service. But in theory, all things being equal, if there wasn't tree shading and we didn't have any issue with coverage and setback land use regulations, we could implement a phase solar system and do like some sort of ground mount or carport system this summer. and then reapply for solar. And as we bring on a geothermal system, then phase 2 might be a roof mounted solar system after your roof is done, and that would power your geothermal system to
So
decouple.
I suspect that ground mount is probably not the most effective way to go, because if I remember correctly, the electrical service comes into the building on the north side of the building. And we wouldn't want to be putting a ground mounted solar array on the north side of the building. So that may not be, a ground mount may not be the most cost effective, but the parking lot is just east of the area where the electrical service comes into the building. So, so that might be an option to do some carport type structures over the parking area.
If it provides you a double benefit of shading cars or buses, protecting cars or buses, super high level, that's a solar panel generates, let's say 400 kilowatts on a 4x8 solar panel. And to install that solar panel generating 400 kilowatts, it's $1.75 a watt if I put it on my house. If the Board of Ed buys it and puts it on their building, it's going to be $2.25 because it's prevailing wage. If it's got to have its own structure to support it with a footing and concrete base and steel,
it's a lot more.
It goes to $4 a watt. But it's still generating the same amount of juice. Just the install cost doubles. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, and that's why I think, Mark, if we're able to, when we put the RFP out, if we can, give the bidders the option of giving it to us in a couple of different ways, then it makes it easier for those who are crunching the numbers and making the decisions. Because the solar and the roof and the windows and the oil tank are not the only things we're looking at. I mean, we're looking at a lot more projects, which is going to have a tremendous cost to the taxpayers over a period of time. And so we also need to be really good stewards of what our recommendations are, because we want to balance cost with safety, energy efficiency, and sustainability. I mean, all of those are very, very important factors. And, from an Ashford taxpayer's perspective, I intend to live here the rest of my life. I want the school to be in great condition, but I also want to be able to afford to live here when I get into my retirement years. And the school building is probably the single biggest investment we have in our town, and it's really important that we take great care of it. We make good decisions as we move forward. And so I think having the different pieces of the puzzle allows those that are making decisions to really consider all of those factors as we move forward and look at the big picture. I mean, we're looking at just a really small piece of the picture here. The building hasn't seen significant work in 40 or 50 years, so we're really looking at essentially renovating the building as new over a period of time. Because the school is according to the numbers, the school is big enough for our need. It's how we use the building has changed from the way the building was designed back in the 1950s, and then the various additions that were put on. So there's a lot of moving pieces to this, and we're going to be looking at, over time, we're going to be looking at spending, multiple millions of dollars on this building. So I think unless there's anything else that we really need to go over tonight, I'd like to, potentially adjourn the meeting so that we can get to work on all those things that we've got to do over the next week. And then we can either regroup, or we can send out a memo to everybody and let everybody know what we've done and where we're going for the next step.
Agreed.
All right. And
Great.
Jen, thank you very much for taking minutes for us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night,
Nice meeting you.
everybody.
Good night.
Nice talking to you.
Night.
Good night. Thank you.